Philip Moreau tells us that he had been caught up in himself in evangelicalism or Christian Zionism of his day, and he learned about it from the inside. This has been the case with most of those of us who have come to understand Christian Zionism, including this very author. Philip Moreau has been an encouragement to your speaker and to all those who support We Hold These Truths. He was a dedicated scholar with an engineer's logic and a lawyer's tenacity that allowed him to foresee error in 1927 that others never detected and which it took me 60 years to understand. Your speaker must admit and echo Dr. Moreau's confession, for I too was of their number, and like him I also am profoundly sympathetic for those who are caught up in dispensationalism. As his words suggest, we are not fighting Christian Zionists. We are trying to reclaim them back to basic and fundamental or orthodox Christianity. Dr. F. Furman Curley is another unsung Christian scholar who saw the path to war in the era of dispensationalism. He was head of graduate studies at Abilene Christian University in 1983 when he wrote of Christian Zionism and its evil fruits of perpetual war in the Middle East. His short book, The Middle East Crisis in Biblical Perspective, takes sharp issue with those he calls Israel First millennialists. He names radical Zionist prophets of war, Hal Lindsey and the late Jerry Falwell, who he said would help nudge the U.S. into endless war with Islamic State. Dr. Curley explained why. When the concept of Armageddon, as in Revelation 16:16 is raised, those who believe in a literal war at Armageddon often feel that Christians should work to start this war and should vigorously participate in it. Those in particular who view this present situation as Armageddon believe that Christians should support Israel with the vigor, and they urge our government to take an active part in the conflict in the Middle East. Curley saw Christian Zionist support for Israel's brutal occupation of Palestine as a precursor to more wars in the Middle East, and he concluded, one needs to be absolutely certain that the doctrine he follows is God's and not of men, before he advocates a doctrine that would put the blood of other men on our hands. Dr. Curley explains the neo-Christian love affair with war as a religious fixation, correctly stating, quote, Christians must pray for peace in the Middle East. Premillennialists must pray and work for World War III so Armageddon will come. They cannot pray for peace in the Middle East. If a follower of Christian Zionism would only examine the simple teachings of Jesus in the New Testament, we will find that there is not a single passage or phrase that would give a follower of Christ cause to take the life of another man or another man's child. Certainly, we must not kill a man's wife in a faraway country. No such biblical permission exists. We have summarized Christian Zionism's unnatural and unbiblical love affair with the agnostic Zionist state of Israel. Now we will examine how the followers of Christ have become deterred to accept false, anti-Jesus doctrine of Christian Zionism that has led to the death of millions, many of them our own. And we will first take a quick look at the renegade state of Israel in its dealing with its Arab neighbors in the Gaza Strip, which is so much in our news today. Now, when we talk about the Middle East, we cannot help but think about Palestine. And I have a picture that I took myself in Gaza, the Gaza Strip, as some call it, but this was in Gaza City, and this is a photograph of the Baptist Church of Gaza City. It stands on Omar Mokhtar Boulevard right next to a mosque, and in fact, this Baptist church was built in an old mosque. You can see the dome roof of the mosque up over the top of the curved sign over the gate. Sign says Baptist Church in English on one side, and on the other side, going backwards toward the middle, it says in Arabic Baptist Church. And this Baptist church has existed side by side next to the mosque, attended by many people who used to be Muslims, and some who are from America, but who have lived in total peace without a locked door or a locked gate for 6 years during the worst crisis of the Middle East. If you went to this church and asked the people if they were at peace with their Muslim neighbors, they would tell you absolutely, in fact, that we are engaged in the same conflict that they are for our own independence. We want independence for Palestine. And religion is not an issue here. It is a question of truth
and a question of righteousness and a question of peace. One of the members of this church told me that his two sons, and by the way, he of course is a Baptist, he told me that his two sons' school had been destroyed the previous week by two missiles that were fired from an American airplane, an F-16, two 500-pound missiles that penetrated the roof of the school at night when the children were not there and completely destroyed their school. And that his children were now afraid to go to school, and furthermore, he didn't know where he was going to send them. That school was attended by both Christian and Muslim families who sent their children there, and both of them found themselves out of a school. So obviously, they had a way of getting along together. What they could not stand was being bombed by American bombs and missiles at night. You're looking at a funeral parade. I took this picture from right in front of the Baptist church. I went out onto the street to watch the parade, and I photographed these men going by. The night before, there had been a missile raid. I viewed it from my rooftop, and I have a recording of it and pictures of the flashes and bangs on my camcorder taken from my rooftop at night in Gaza City.
Where those things are coming down. Here comes another one, lighted up. The sky is being lighted up by these things now. That one we can see, but the plane has got to be right up there. Never seen anything like it. The most horrible thing I can imagine. Here comes another one fired from a much lower angle right off to my left. Behind the tree, now coming out from the tree.
4 men, women, and children were killed, and 30 were wounded. I don't know how many of the 30 eventually died of their wounds, because the wounds are, of course, oftentimes extremely serious. These people were burying their dead the next day, and I walked in the parade. And in that parade, I'm sure there were Christians walking with the Muslims. And I walked along behind it, and I feel ashamed for what is happening in America, that we would tolerate this going on in our country. The building of missiles and weapons that kill people in a faraway place, people that we don't even know, where you can stand in front of a Baptist church and photograph a funeral of Muslims walking in a parade the next day. And yet they do not hate us. I couldn't help but wonder as I watched, why don't they hate us? Why would they accept the Baptist church there when those missiles come from America? This is an article on our website. It's called Attacking Islam. This author wrote this article in 1994, and it was published in a national magazine. The national magazine may have wished they wouldn't have published it because they received a lot of criticism for it. But what my statement said was that we are in a serial war in which we are going into battle time and time again on events that we call wars, and invariably what we are attacking is Muslim countries like Iraq, and of course Somalia before that, and then Iraq before that, and others like Bosnia through sanctions. My article asked the question in 1994, what is it that is causing a world war, as Mr. Furman Curry called it? He called it a world war. I called it a war on Islam. And what is it that's causing Americans to do this? Why are Americans participating in the bombing of countries around the world, and why is it that they accept this? That is the question that we will begin to answer as we go forward with this presentation. Here's a picture of Cyrus I. Scofield taken from the front of an excellent book called The Incredible Scofield and His Book, written by Joseph Canfield. Mr. Canfield, about 10 or 15 years ago, set out to find out who Cyrus Scofield was, the author of the famous Scofield Study Bible, and what connection Scofield's life might have with what was in the Bible. And he found an amazing thing. He found that the Scofield Study Bible basically calls for the support of Israel in the Middle East, and it is a document that actually seeks to and calls for war. Now, we need to talk a little bit about the nature of this man who is so famous in American history that his name is on literally millions of Bibles, some of you may have them, called the Scofield Study Bible, or Scofield Reference Bible, I should say. Cyrus Scofield was basically a criminal. He was a young Civil War veteran who enlisted on the side of the South, even though he was from Michigan. After a little while, in hearing about conflict, he wasn't in conflict, but after a little while he decided he'd made a mistake, and he sought to get out, and the Confederacy let him out of the military because he admitted that he'd falsified his age and he was underage. A few years later, he ended up in St. Louis, Missouri, where he declared himself to be a lawyer. He put a shingle on his door saying that he was a lawyer. He had no training to be a lawyer, but he went on and acted as one. And Cyrus Scofield went on from there to follow a life of what virtually was crime. He became a professional forger. He placed the names of other people on documents and sold the documents for his own gain. One of the people whose signatures he forged was his mother-in-law. He sold her property, fleeced her out of most of her wealth. He also deserted her daughter with her 2 children, leaving her to take care of it herself in the Old West. Scofield was eventually caught, accused of forgery, charged, convicted, and sent to the state prison in Kansas, where he spent, I believe, 2 years in prison. Upon being released, Scofield took up a new profession, preaching the gospel. Scofield became the leader of a small church in Texas. He went where he wasn't known, and he started a church in Fort Worth, Texas, and it was successful. He was an artful talker, very, very persuasive, and he soon attracted a following in his little church. And before very long, something very unusual happened, though. Scofield decided that he wanted to write a Bible. And without portfolio, without history, without any training, without any college, Scofield managed to get his church to give him a leave of absence with pay. They agreed to pay him $1,500 a year. And Scofield went off to Switzerland, where he lived in Lake Geneva. And for the next 4 years, with no other means of support, he wrote what turned out to be the Scofield Reference Bible that was published in 1908. What was the Scofield Reference Bible? The Scofield Reference Bible was a standard King James version of the Old Testament and New Testament that had its pages torn out and notes attached to them, footnotes written on yellow pads, Scofield told us in his biography. He assembled a huge file of yellow notes about the Scofield Bible, interpreting the King James Version of the Bible, saying what it was supposed to mean to us, and with that, he went forward to have the Bible published. Now, I should tell you that Scofield did not invent this idea. A Scotchman named John Nelson Darby, who started an organization called Plymouth Brethren, came to the United States, also financed mysteriously without any real means of support, without any success in his background. But Darby came to the United States and began touring the country selling his concept of a Darbyism, which in effect called for a Armageddon, the same Armageddon that Dr. Curley was talking about at the outset of this lecture. Armageddon, where there would be a terrible war in Israel. And there were a number of other factors in this idea that Scofield picked up on, and he became a follower of John Nelson Darby, and he essentially plagiarized, I suppose, or borrowed much of what Darby had said, and this was what went into the footnotes of the study Bible that became known as the Scofield Study Bible. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Before we go further, it's going to come naturally to most of us to wonder where this man got, where he found the financial support to take on such a monumental task as taking 4 years of his life off to live in a very posh, wealthy European place and to do nothing other than doodle on yellow pads. It will also make us wonder how it is that this man could possibly get into Oxford University Press.